Hello and welcome to As the CMMC Churns. I'm Matthew Titcomb, the CEO of Peak InfoSec, an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization. I'm also a CMMC Certified Assessor, professional, and been doing IT for way too long. Today's topic for As the CMMC Churns is requirements have relationships. Yep, this is something that's pretty hidden amongst many assessors and people that are up and coming within the 800-171 and even 853 ecosystems. It takes a while of steeping in to really understand that the requirements are not standalone things. And unfortunately, what happens is for younger assessors and professionals, they look at these all myopically and they get tunnel vision on the requirement itself. The interesting part is tunnel vision is your enemy, especially in combat. Tunnel vision is, you see it a lot more in pilots, as they're going through G-forces, they get, G-lock, and they get tighter vision. Is the loss of blood to their brain causes them to focus on a very small point. So when that's going on, they may be focused on the enemy in front of them, but they don't know somebody's on their six. In cybersecurity, this is a lack of situational awareness as well. That lack of situational awareness is what leaves hackers in your environment for months on end that you don't know what they're doing until they're ready to drop a ransomware note on you. So again, tunnel vision is bad. Now, over-focusing though on a single requirement does leave you blind to its relationships. When you're left blind to its relationships and how things are supposed to mesh together, you're potentially now left without understanding how things should be flowing or how one requirement is influencing or shaping another requirement. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through 5 simple use cases of CMMC requirements or 800-171 requirements, then how they fit together, and what, as an assessor, things that we're looking for when we're going through these. So let's start with a shocker. While 311 is the first requirement in 800-171, it's actually the 7th-ish, and we'll talk about the ish. So when it comes down to it, your very first thing you need to do is to control the flow of CUI. This is a whole bunch of very high-level design decisions. How are you going to architect? How are you going to flow? People overinterpret and jump to 313 as we must do data loss prevention. No. Data loss prevention is a mechanism by which you can be doing this, yes, but that is not the original intent of this control. So don't go chasing technology by default on that one. What comes next is, well, we're going to control the flow. Well, now we need to verify and control the limit of connections to and the use of external systems. We've all moved to the cloud. So what clouds are you going to use? Are you using Microsoft? Are you using the right Microsoft and the right cloud level? Those are the type of conversations you're going to have with this one. Then what comes next, you've got your design, you've got everything. Now all of a sudden, well, now we need to start loading people into it. Have they had their background checks? And then after that comes, are they trained? Here's the catch. What follows then is 311. So from a people point of view, if you're giving people access to your environment that contains CUI before they've had a background check and before they've been trained, you're in violation. And that's a not met. Yeah. Not met. So just to understand this context, this is stuff that we as assessors will come in and look for to see if you've properly flowed this path. Oh, remember that ish? Well, yeah, there's a little circumvention path that in that verify connect and you're setting up things like using AvePoint to back up your Office 365 content. You're going to do that with a service account, otherwise known as a POW, or a process acting on behalf of authorized user. Well, that doesn't require training, doesn't require screening because it's a service account. Likewise, how are you going to limit devices that have access to that external information system. That's where you can squish, and suddenly 311 becomes the third from a device or service account perspective. Now, interestingly, when we talk about 311, aside from those kind of the very front, everything else in the middle are bookends to 314.7. Because everything else is fundamentally about detecting and stopping unauthorized use of organization systems. So going from 311, you're limiting to least privilege, you're implementing stuff, you're putting in controls, you're putting in monitoring, you're doing all this other stuff in the middle, but at the very end, it's ultimately about identifying unauthorized usage of that system. And you can kind of trace these all back together. It's kind of stupid fun stuff we do, but yeah, that's how this all kind of fits together at a very high macro level. Now, if we jump down, we talked about this in a previous CMMC Churns of what happens when the verb approve doesn't appear in your processes. Bad things happen, by the way. So, the classic change request is submitted. It gets to 343 for track, review, and approve. Again, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Well, realistically, before you can even approve it, you got to make sure you've analyzed the security impact before it's approved. Likewise, you need to make sure that if this is a physical or logical access restrictions, you've handled everything in 345. Oh, which is another approve. Well, once you're really ready and you've made that approval decision, yeah, you're going to tell the user they're not submitted and they're not authorized and it'll end. But if it is, you're going to affect the change. Well, your next thing is now you're going to document that change. Not only have you documented the change in the change ticket, you got to go back and document the change to your infrastructure, your baseline, your configurations, etc. Well, related to that general one then is 342. You've got to establish and enforce the security configuration settings that may be coming out of that original change request. And let's assume that we're now playing with 318, limit unsuccessful login attempts. So when we're limiting unsuccessful login attempts, here's the catch of all this from the previous churns, if you don't have the verb approved, 318 is not met. Because the design documentation for 318 is draft. So that's the criticality of understanding how all of these play together. And after you've done all that, now you can end the process. Likewise, here's an interesting one for detecting and responding to unauthorized usage, the audit and accountability family. Shocker, the audit and accountability family have nothing to do with log reviews in detecting unauthorized usage. Nothing. It's a set of design requirements. That's all. That feed into fundamentally 314.6. Monitor your systems. That's your continuous monitoring capability that's being told to you to stand up and do an audit and accountability. 314.6 is your doing. Coming out of 314.6 then is 314.7. Now we need to identify. Well, crap, what happens if we do identify? Well, that's now the incident response family. So do not think, key story in here in audit and accountability, that you're doing 314.6, because you're not. Likewise, within the audit and accountability, this is another one we see screwed up all the time, and it kind of comes back into the interpretation that people are reviewing logs in audit and accountability. In 313, you're supposed to create your audit logs. You're supposed to verify that, hey, we know the logs, we know the content. We're verifying the logs are being generated, verifying the logs have the content that they should, and that everything's working. We're retaining them as we're supposed to. Well, life happens. You have a system change. You upgraded your firewall, you upgraded your operating system, you did something. Out of that system change, now you jump to 313. You're supposed to review and update logged events. This is not review logged events for malicious activity. This is go back to 311 and make sure that the logs that you originally set up and configured are still working. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. This is interestingly a little extension on a change ticket if you do it savvily. Vulnerability management. Here's another one we see screwed up all the time. So vulnerability management, yes, we'll start with 3.11.2. First, you've got to define how often you're going to be scanning. Now, a little distinction there about system scanning versus application scanning can cause bifurcation because application scanning is for custom development. The other related part of vulnerability management is 3.14.3. You're getting CISA notices, you're getting vendor notices about vulnerabilities, things you need to be doing. That, in turn, feeds into 3.14.1. 3.14.1 is your service level agreement internal for how fast you're going to be fixing and patching things. Not only that, it's also how fast you're going to be responding to those things and getting them to task to the right people. So if you're not doing 3.14.1 right, you really can't do 3.11.3 right, because 3.14.1 tells you by when you have to remediate vulnerabilities. It also tells you by when in 3.7.1 you have to perform maintenance. Now, underneath 800.171 Rev 3, 3.7.1 is actually going to go away. They realized in their footnote, even in Rev 2, says it's in availability centric, so they're chucking it back over to availability as a non-confidentiality oriented control. Now, the big loop back here is after you've remediated, yes, you're still scanning to make sure that that remediation actually took, and likewise for all new vulnerabilities that are always coming out every day. So let's sum up. Getting tunnel visioned on a single requirement is bad. Don't do it. Failing to understand, well, that's going to lead your organization to not to implement things correctly. We'll talk about it in another CMMC Churns. Not understanding how all this fits together leads to a very bad system security plan that starts to cause problems. And then overall, this is going to increase the number of not mets that you have. Really, take time to understand or find an expert who understands how the requirements mesh together when you're setting up your organizational system to make sure you're doing it right. Again, I'm Matt Titcomb from Peak InfoSec. Thank you for joining us for As the CMMC Churns. Bye.